Hello and welcome to the Services School Stories podcast. You'll hear from veterans and partners who'll share their stories and insights about how you can use higher education to transition from the military and achieve your goals. Now let's get going. All right, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a very, very distinguished guest, Kaleth Wright, who is the 18th Chief Master Sergeant of the U.S. Air Force. He served on active duty for 31 years from 1989 to 2020. So he reached the highest position you possibly can as an enlisted Air Force Airman. So very, very impressive career, during which time he earned both a bachelor's degree and an MBA. Upon retirement, he had some great experience in the private sector, and he is currently serving on Services School's board of directors. So it is an honor to have him here with us on the podcast. And Kaleth, I'll kick it over to you. Would love to hear a little bit about your background and what got you into the military.
Hey, Alec, thank you, man. I appreciate it, and it's exciting to be here with you today and get to share some of my thoughts and background with your audience. So like you said, I joined the military in 1989. I tried college for a little bit. Things didn't work out, so I found myself back home working at a barbecue restaurant, and just feeling like, hey, this is not the life for me. And I joined the Air Force on a whim. I had no desire to join. I grew up in a military town, an army town, Columbus, Georgia. So I had really no desire to join the military, but I know I needed to get away from home. And so somehow I ended up in the Air Force thinking that I'd just do 2 or 3 years or 4 years and going about my life. And like you said, 31 years later, I was still serving. So I ended up with a pretty good career. Had a good time. Got to help a lot of people. Received a lot of help. Took full advantage of my educational benefits, and so I'm kind of glad it worked out the way that it did.
Yeah, very cool. So when you said it was a whim that made you want to join the Air Force, so you're in an army town. Everybody's got that story where they go to they've all the recruiters are in the same place, and then they just kind of pick the one that they had the best experience with the recruiter. So what was it specifically about the Air Force that made you gravitate towards it?
Yeah, so I think because I spent so much time around the Army when I was a teenager, I used to go out to the Army base, Fort Benning at the time, and play basketball against soldiers, and I would sneak in the NCO club and all that type of. And I would see people marching, and I had some soldiers that lived in my neighborhood, and so I kind of convinced myself that all right, this is probably not a place that I wanted to be. I mean, just the military in general. And at some point, I had crossed paths with an Air Force recruiter, a guy by the name of Rick Middlebrooks, that I honestly didn't remember until the day I decided to join the Air Force. So I'm laying at home on the couch trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And my wallet falls out of my pocket, and the only thing that falls out was a Air Force recruiter's card. This guy, Rick Middlebrooks. So I looked down at it and said, "Oh, I'll just join the Air Force." And so I didn't even bother going to any other recruiters. I think I might have spoken to a Navy recruiter, and he was talking about submarines and all this, and I was like, nah, that probably won't work for me. And I thought the Air Force was really the easiest route. Is honestly why I chose it.
Oh, wow. All right. Now, but the really interesting thing here is we hear this story a lot where people will say, I wasn't even thinking about making it a career or anything like that. And then they get into the service, they really love what they do, and then, like you said, 31 years later, reach the highest position you possibly can in the Air Force. And so I'm really interested to know, kind of how your as a junior enlisted airman, how that first tour went, and what made you just decide to keep standing and keep doing it.
Yeah, the first tour didn't go well, man. So, because I really I really didn't want to join, I really wasn't that interested in being a good airman and acting right. So I had a lot of challenges with discipline, with showing up on time, with, doing the things that I was supposed to do. I didn't like being told what to do, not quite sure where that came from. So I was struggling quite a bit. But I had a great mentor who wrapped his arm around me and helped me become a better version of myself through quite a few different experiences. But even at the end of my first enlistment, I didn't love it. I didn't love the Air Force. I wasn't bent on staying in. But what I did know was I had told myself in this first enlistment, hey, I'm going to save some money and I'm going to get some schooling done so that when I get ready to get out, I'll at least be a leg up. So I get to the end of the first enlistment, man, I ain't got a dime. I don't have a dime in my pocket, and I hadn't taken one class. So I thought to myself, okay, let's try it again. I'll try to do better on the second enlistment. And then on the second enlistment, by the time I got through that one, I'd gotten married and started having kids. And it's like, oh man, these little buddies are expensive. So let's just keep going. It was probably my third enlistment, somewhere around my 10-year mark, where I before I really, really got bought in and said, okay, now I'm
Wow.
kind of ready to make this uh, a career. Yeah.
Gotcha. And talk to us about like the different duty stations because you said you want to get out of Columbus, Georgia, and so where were you stationed? What was your career path looking like? Were you a lot of times people re-enlist to go to a particular duty station or and then you mentioned how you met your wife. And how did that whole process work in the early part of your let's just say your 20s in the military? What did those look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So my first duty station was Pope Air Force Base in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and it was quite the thing, man. Back in the day, Fayetteville has gotten somewhat better now, but it wasn't a friendly, happy place in the early '90s when I was stationed there. But nonetheless, it's where I met my mentor, where I met some lifelong friends that I still have to this day, and kind of where I got my early stripes, I guess you could call it, both literally and figuratively, where I was making a lot of mistakes and getting a lot of help from a lot of people. I transitioned from Pope to a short tour in Korea. So went overseas pretty early in my career. I think in 1994, so about 5 years in, I was overseas where I made I got promoted, became an NCO. I got promoted in Korea. I didn't actually become an NCO until the next year. And from Korea, I went to Japan. And so I stayed overseas. And that's really in Japan is kind of where I really started to figure things out and get my career on track as a young NCO. And uh, I would say that's where I think I started to turn around. I started the 180 a little bit earlier, but it really started taking effect during that time in the late '90s in Okinawa, Japan, at Kadena Air Base.
Very cool. And then you mentioned education is like one of the reasons why you wanted to join. And I mean, there's a stat that out there. I mean, that all stats are somewhat manufactured, but I think this one sounds directionally accurate. But it's like something like 70 odd percent of military people sign up for educational benefits, and you mentioned that you fit in that category. And at what point in your career did you make the decision to start pursuing higher education, start taking online or taking classes and things like that?
Yeah, so I started probably at Pope. I started, I think, at least exploring. I remember taking a class or two, maybe. I took a little bit at uh, maybe one class in Korea, and then I really kind of dug in when I got to Kadena. But all in total, it took me from the time I signed up for my first class, it took me almost 10 years to complete that first degree. Now, some of it was just because I jumped schools a couple of times. Back then, we didn't really have the online opportunities, and so if the particular school that you were attending, for me, I think I started with Campbell University and I did a Central Texas and a few others. I eventually got my degree from University of Maryland, University College. I think it's University of Maryland Global Campus now. But so if those particular schools didn't have an office at the installation that you were assigned to, then you had to delay it until you got to one, or you had to change schools, which I ended up doing a couple of times. But I eventually finished up my degree. I was actually had PCS to Germany by the time from Kadena by the time I finished in 2002, I believe it was.
Oh wow! And so you're doing a lot of time overseas.
I did a lot of time overseas. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, just quick question here now. So just doing the time frame. in the 1990s when you were getting your education, you mentioned you needed an office on campus. Was that because you couldn't take classes online and you had to go to an actual classroom, or or was there still an ability to do online classes back in those days?
Yeah, so there was no ability, at least to my recollection, certainly in the '90s, to do any online classes. If I remember correctly, we had just kind of got internet in the late '90s. Yeah, there was no such thing as online classes. You'd have to go to the education center, sign up, and then most of the universities that were serviced on an installation had an office in within the education center, and then they held classes somewhere on base. Sometimes in that education building, sometimes in other buildings. So a majority, I may have taken one or two online classes at the very end of my undergraduate program, but for the most part, it was all in class, on base after work,
Oh,
and
yeah.
sometimes on weekends. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so you at that point, so you finished when you finished your degree, you basically you kind of like rounded that 10-year hump where if you've done 10, you might as well do another 10 to get the retirement benefits, and you got your degree. So it seemed like you at that point accomplished a couple of your big goals. You got some money, got some education under your belt, started a family, and at this point, were you thinking about just getting to that 20-year mark and punching out, or did you have aspirations of taking further leadership roles beyond that 20?
Yeah, at this point, I think I had aspirations of, I knew for a fact that I wanted to become a chief. I didn't think a whole lot about becoming the chief master sergeant of the Air Force, but I remember encountering some chiefs, when I was younger, and seeing that, okay, these are the guys that are in charge. These are the guys that are making all of the decisions. These are the ones that have all the power. Yeah, that's going to be me. Like, because I like being in charge. I like making decisions. I got all these ideas, and I had a mentor one day tell me when I was frustrated. I was probably at E6, probably at E6. And I was frustrated because I wanted to make these changes and things weren't going the way that I wanted them to go. And he said, hey, one of the best ways that you can have an impact on how things go around here is get promoted, right? And put yourself in a position to make decisions. And I never forgot that. And so I kind of always aspired. So I wasn't really thinking, hey, I'll get out at 20. I wasn't sure how long I was going to stay in, but I knew I wanted to make chief and um, and see how far I could go.
That's great. And you talk about the value of mentorship. And personally, I'm still serving in the reserves. I've had a couple great mentors. I have one mentor I actively stay in touch with right now who's been very, very helpful to me. Can you talk a little bit about the process you followed to get a mentor? And it's not a science, right? You have to kind of find somebody you see eye to eye with, then keep in touch with them and all that. But I think it'd be really helpful for a lot of our listeners who may still be serving, who are looking for some mentorship, to get your perspectives on how to find someone who can mentor them well, and the real value of that relationship.
Yeah, so I would say, most of the mentors that I had, and even the ones that I still have today, the relationship developed, relatively organically, right? So we met in some environment. It might have been at an event or in some professional or environment, or maybe at a social event. Um, s- you know, s- was able to strike up a conversation, and generally it's sometimes one of the mentors that I have, he approached me. We were golfing buddies, and he approached me, and he kind of just said, hey man, you seem pretty sharp. I think there's more out there for you. And he kind of latched himself on to me. And then I've had others, mentors, female in particular, by the name of Vicky Gamble, who, I went to her at one point and said, hey, I have a few questions. And then those questions turned into more questions, and those questions turned into opportunities, her being able to see that the potential I had and recommended me for, certain opportunities. So I think some of it is, it's a little bit, it's always odd, who's actually responsible for engaging and developing a mentor relationship. Is it me, the mentee? Should I go out and ask someone, or should the more senior experienced folks kind of recognize somebody who has potential and latch on to them. I don't know that there's any one best way to do it because it happened both ways with me. But what I would say to somebody who's in the throes of their career and they're looking for maybe a mentor or coach or somebody to help them guide it through is, hey, find that person that you admire, that you look up to, that you think, has what it takes to, one, succeed themselves, and two, help you succeed. And then maybe just approach them with, hey, do you mind if we grab a cup of coffee? I'd love to ask you a few questions. And uh, I mean, if you're bold enough to just say, "Hey, you're going to be my mentor, so I'll see you here," that's great. But normally a softer approach of, "Hey, you mind grabbing lunch or a cup of coffee? I'd love to hear your thoughts on a particular thing," and then it kind of just grows from there.
Yeah, that's what I've found as well. And I'm in a position which I think a lot of people kind of mid career are at, where I've got people I'm mentoring right now actively, particularly transitioning service members, and I've also got mentors. And so I think you're talking about, yeah, as we're talking about your journey through your career, you're kind of at your midpoint right now where you've got mentors. But at what stage did you start mentoring people? And I'm gonna share your nickname. You are known as Enlisted Jesus due to your advocacy for
Yeah.
uh, for our enlisted veterans and your support. And so, how did you basically start taking on that role?
Yeah, so pretty early during that time at Kadena, as a young staff sergeant, tech sergeant, E6, E5, E6 in the Air Force, I kind of realized that I had this knack for helping other people. Again, I think it's something that I kind of naturally got from my mother, really, and so I started reaching out to people. I started just generally the people that were around me in my workplace. Sometimes I would meet young airmen that I didn't know from Adam, but I'd see him in the chow hall. We call it the DFAC now, dining facility, or in the gym or something like that. And I remembered what it was like, particularly to be a young minority in the Air Force. I remember some of the struggles I went through. So when I would see some of these guys, sometimes I could see the despair on their faces. I could see, I could see them making the same mistakes that I made, right? Looking pretty shabby in their uniform or, not getting to work on time and stuff like that. And so I would just, grab them and say, hey man, what you got going on? How's life? How's life treating you? What are you doing these days? And sometimes they would open up and sometimes they wouldn't. But so pretty early in my career, I started being a mentor. I started studying what mentorship was and how to do it. Some of it came natural, but I was always kind of curious about, how does this work? I probably overstepped my bounds at times. If you had somebody you were supervising, Alec, and I didn't think you were doing a good enough job, I would just take over, right? I would just be like, all right, well, I'm going to be your mentor now. So, and with really no regard for talking to you or how you might have, taken it then. And so, I created a little bit of controversy at times. I eventually figured out how to do that a little bit better. But
Yeah, and so one of the things you mentioned, or a couple things I want to go back to. So first off, you shared that one of your best mentors had been a female. You shared how also you had mentored other minorities. My question is, a lot of times, people will reach out and be interested in that mentorship relationship with people who look like them. They feel more comfortable. If you're a female, you want a female mentor. If you're a minority, you want a minority mentor. Now, how would you suggest, kind of breaking down those barriers, because you're someone who had succeeded because of someone who was a different gender. They were very instrumental in your success, and I think that we have a lot to offer people who don't necessarily look like us. So how do you talk about, or how do you recommend kind of breaking down those barriers and mentoring people who don't necessarily look like you?
yeah, so I think the first thing is for all of us, whether you're the mentee or the mentor, is to one recognize that we all kind of have the biases, right? We just naturally feel more comfortable with people who look like us, sometimes people who are the same gender, and probably more than that, people who we perceive have the same experience and background as us. So if I'm a maintainer, right? If I fix airplanes for a living, I initially probably don't want to hear a lot from a guy who is a medic or who doesn't understand what it's like to be out on the flight line, during in the cold or in the heat for hours and hours at a time. And sometimes we don't recognize that people who one, don't look like us, don't have the same experience as us, can be the best mentors because they can be very impartial. And so I think the first thing we all have to do is recognize that I have this bias, right? I naturally gravitate toward people who look like me. So I'm going to be intentional about finding people who don't look like me, females, people who are not, minorities, and saying, hey, how can I help you today? What is it that you might need? And then I had to do it the same thing for myself when I was looking for mentors is making sure that I took the time and was intentional about seeking out advice and guidance from people who didn't look like me, who didn't have the same background or experience, and really being open. That's another part of it too. Is sometimes it's hard to be open because if you perceived that we don't have the same lived experience because of our race, because of our gender, because of our experience, sometimes it's hard to be open to suggestions from people.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really true, and I think that just that you talk about those different perspectives we have. If you want to lead people, you're not just leading people that look like you. So if you get feedback from mentors from a different background, that can only help and improve your ability to lead.
Mm.
And then mentorship as well, getting perspectives for me. I think, I go back to the Navy, where if I'm talking to a sailor from a different background than myself, sharing the challenge that they have and how I can be a better leader to them, I think that can only make me a better leader. So I think it works both ways, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And so as we talk about your career now, getting to where you were in the Air Force is obviously no small accomplishment. There's only one person in the entire Air Force who reaches that rank. And so how did you start getting there? Was that ever in your mind? Was that ever a possibility to become the chief master sergeant, or that just kind of happened? Like, can you just talk us through that process?
Yeah, a little bit of both, right? It was always I always felt like I know I can do it. I just never felt like I was going to get the opportunity, right? Because so much of it is timing. There's some luck involved. There's some you got to kind of be in the right circles and all this type of stuff. And I honestly I never felt like I was ever in the right circles. I never felt like the timing was going to work out until it did, right? I used to aspire to it, and I always said if the opportunity knocks, I guarantee you I'll be ready. But I just had convinced myself that opportunity just won't knock, and some of it was because I knew so many talented and super sharp individuals that I thought should have had the opportunity before me that just things just didn't line up right. The timing didn't work out. There's always bias in these systems. There was bias in the system where they didn't get the opportunity, and I thought to myself, I'll be no different. And I'm kind of watching this in real time, and it's almost like a movie is playing. I go from my first kind of senior position at McConnell Air Force Base at a tanker wing. I deployed for a year to Afghanistan and was the senior Air Force enlisted person in all of Afghanistan. And then I transitioned to Europe. So I'm the senior guy for Europe and Africa for the Air Force. And even then, right, I'm watching and I kind of see how things are playing out, but I have no clue until right up until the person before me retire is getting ready to retire. Just like every 4 years, we see this big article in the newspaper. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force is retiring. Who's going to be the next one? Um, we we didn't it wasn't the same as it had been. Normally there'd be pictures of 10 or 12 people. It could be this person, it could be that person. What I later found out is my boss, he didn't want to go through all of that. So he simply asked his colleagues, the other four stars, hey, who would you guys recommend? They all recommended, two or three people. My name was not in the original list of recommendations. I was, not unknown, but I wasn't one of the more known or popular E9s at the time. And but my boss in Europe, he says, well, I don't know, maybe you should look at K Wright. And the guy my eventual boss says, okay, well, who is that? And he said, well, that's my chief over in Europe and Africa. And he said, oh, fine. And they added me to the slate, and then the rest was history, I guess.
Wow. Okay. So that is so that's the commander of the U.S. Air Forces in Europe reached out on your behalf, unbeknownst to you.
Unbeknownst to me, yeah.
Wow. So it actually did just happen. How'd you find out that you're in consideration? You're minding your business. You come into the office and people are like, hey, guess what?
Yeah, well, he told me he eventually after he came back from DC, he was in DC meeting with the chief of staff, and he came back and told me that he submitted my name, and I thought, okay, no, well, no big deal. We'll see what happens. I honestly didn't think much about it, and then a few days later, I get a call from the chief of staff's office, saying, "Hey, General Goldfein is who was the chief of staff at the time
Yeah.
that I served with. He wants you and your wife to come here for an interview to DC." And I thought, oh, okay, well, damn, this is real. And and even then, I still thought like, yeah, I just I don't know the chances. And some of it was because, Alec, I had been in situations where, I'd submitted people for certain jobs. I put people on slates to interview for certain jobs, kind of knowing that they probably wouldn't get it. Right. It's not that they don't have a chance, but I kind of know in the back of my mind, this general has kind of already told me he kind of knows who he wants to go with. But he wanted to see a slate of people anyway, right? So I kind of put myself in that category of he probably already has who he wants, but let's see what happens. And the morning of the interview, the morning of before I went to interview with this man, I had a little notebook and I wrote in there before the interview, I was like, I'm about to be the mother loving Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. I just called it. I just decided that morning that it's gonna happen.
So cool.
I use different language, but
So what did that? Yeah, and so you go through the interview. What I mean, just out of curiosity, what is the interview? Because we all go through job interviews. Now that's got to be a pretty big one. What was it like?
Yeah, so it was pretty cool. He's probably different than most interviews, and I interview for a lot of jobs throughout my career. This was the most unique and the most different and the most, I would say, enjoyable one that I ever experienced. So what happened is he invited my wife and I to his house on Fort Myer, the chief of staff's house, and we had breakfast. Right, there were no questions. We just kind of socialized. We laughed. We joked. We enjoyed breakfast together. My wife at the time and his wife went off, and I'm not quite sure what they did. And then he and I went into a study in his home, and we started an interview. But it was almost just like you and I talking. He was asking questions, but it was a very conversational. How do you prefer when it comes to communication? What's best for you? You like big crowds or you like small crowds? How do you see us? Spending time together, traveling together. What are you reading? It was a very comfortable conversation. We compared notes on leadership. We compared notes on books. And we were scheduled for an hour. We went about an hour and 45 minutes. One of his aides had to come and say, "Okay, you guys got to break this up. We got more interviews to do." And so it was really a comforting kind of like, wow, this would be a great person to work for just because he seems so easygoing, so easy to get along with. I kind of almost messed the interview up at one time, right? Because it was so smooth. We were kind of just naturally talking and being organic. And then I feel like I got to throw in some mission kind of stuff. It wasn't that we wasn't talking about, Air Force stuff, but I try to throw in like a national defense strategy uh quote or something. And he says, "Yeah, that sounds good, but there's not a whole lot of people reading the National Defense Strategy, man." I was like, yeah, you're right, you're right. And then we just got back to talking. We were talking sports, we were talking, all kinds of stuff. We were laughing, having a good time. And when I walked out, I told my wife, I said, "Hey, look, let's just go pack our stuff, man. We coming to DC." And she
Wow.
said, "Oh man, did he tell you yet?" I was like, "Nope, he didn't tell me, and he still has two more people to interview. But just mark my word, it's
Oh, that's great. You always love that feeling when you hit it off with an interviewer. So I've had that experience, and I've had experiences where I didn't, and you
yeah,
usually get a good feeling when you walk out. And you're like, all right, that didn't go well, and it's great that the most interview, like the most important interview you had that winning feeling when you left, and so I'm really
yeah,
interested in learning more about the role because we
mhm,
all know about the position. We have the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, the MCPON on the Navy side. We know who they are, but there's a lot of questions about what the primary responsibilities of that role are and their relationship with the head of the service. So I'm really interested in hearing, what it was like coming to DC, taking on that role, and how you saw yourself in it as an advocate for the enlisted airmen.
yeah. I like to break down the role into three different kind of parts. Your primary role is as the senior enlisted leader of your particular service, right? And so you're kind of responsible for advocating and managing, all the programs and all the training and readiness, anything really that impacts enlisted airmen in your service, right? So that's really the brunt of what the job is. Gathering information, advocating, attending meetings, testifying before Congress on behalf of all the enlisted folks, and that could, and depending on what's happening in your service and what priorities you decide to tackle, that could mean any number of things. Most of the stuff I felt like falls in the personnel programs arena, right? So A1 for us, N1 for the Navy. But they also have a role as an international SEL, right? So I spent a lot of time helping our NATO counterparts, our allies from the Pacific, our allies in Africa, sometimes advising, sometimes helping them directly, and even our allies in the Middle East build their enlisted forces because it's safe to say, I would say UK, Australia, and maybe New Zealand have enlisted forces that rival ours, that are similar to ours. But most of our partners, some had no enlisted force that we helped build from scratch. Some had very limited numbers and very limited roles that we helped build. Uh, most had, particularly didn't have development programs for senior enlisted that we helped. So I spent, some of my time working with our counterparts on developing their enlisted forces and partnering in various ways. And then, kind of the third role is as the a joint senior enlisted leader. So I worked a lot with the MCPON, with the Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, and the MCPOG, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, as well as later when we developed the Space Force, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force. And I also spent a lot of time with the SELs of the Guard and the Reserve. So if you think about those three kind of buckets, there's plenty of engagements, there's plenty of advising, there's plenty of opportunities, and I don't care who you are in your service, almost any SEL, right? McPon, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. Most of us spend a limited amount of time, or we spend most of our careers in not in a bubble, but the services are so wide. So for me, right, I had very limited understanding of Air Force Special Operations Command. I had a limited understanding of Air Force Materiel Command, our acquisitions stuff. I had a limited understanding of our global strike, so all of our nuclear stuff. Most of the other parts of the Air Force I had spent time in and had a good understanding. And so I had to spend a significant amount of time, in the first 120 days visiting those bases, spending the night in missile silos, jumping out of airplanes with, special forces guys and doing all that type of stuff and really, really making sure I understood the people that I was advocating for. So again, the job kind of you can the good thing about it is General Goldfein, he gave me a clean slate and said, hey, here are my priorities. You do the job how you want to do it. Just make sure that what you do aligns with, what we're doing here in the headquarters. And then he and I had a great relationship where we spent a lot of time together, talked a lot, bounced a lot of things off of each other.
Yeah, that's so cool. And just throwing it back to one of the things you talked about earlier about the professionalism of our enlisted corps. I've done the in my background in the military. I served on submarines, but I am a foreign area officer in the reserve. So the bulk of the work I do is with our foreign partners. And if you look at the capability of our enlisted force, I'd say I agree 100% obviously with what you said about, there's a few peers, but as far as empowerment and trust of our enlisted. I think that our military as a whole has got the strongest enlisted corps, and I think it's largely due to the competence of our enlisted leaders and the trust that our senior officers place in them. I think your story kind of shared that, so very very cool
Mhm.
there. And but then. Let's going back to one of the other things you're talking about, just understanding the different challenges that military members are going through. As someone in your case, had been in the military for 31 years. How have you seen those challenges evolving, and what do you think the biggest obstacles our enlisted forces are facing right now in the military are?
Oh, well, right now, it's a pretty unique time to be in the military, and from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, people are kind of struggling with. I don't want to get too deep into politics, but what's happening with this administration and some of the executive orders that is turning out to be, somewhat divisive and whatnot, and um, it's causing some people to question, their worth, and causing some people to question whether they, really want to serve. What I really see as one of the biggest challenges for our enlisted airmen right now is retention, right? Is, how do you keep people motivated? How do you allow people to take advantage of the natural evolution of society? For example, AI is a big thing in society. Most military programs are still, relatively old and outdated. The cyber stuff in the military is old and outdated, and people tend to get frustrated, right? When they have to use old equipment, when they aren't able to, and our generation is a lot more innovative, and they really have great ideas that they want to implement, and we have I used to call it the frozen middle, right? They're, the generals and the colonels are saying, yeah, it sounds like a great idea, let's do it. And then there's that group of enlisted and officer, folks in the middle that are saying, nah, we're not doing that, let's just keep doing it the way that we've been doing it.
Yeah,
And people get people get frustrated, right? So I think, there's some retention issues, and kind of what's happening today. There's probably going to be some recruitment issues. I think most of the services didn't meet their recruitment goals in the last year or two, so there's already beginning to become some recruiting issues already.
yeah, and I think we won't stray too much into politics, but I'll tell you what I hear you, and we'll leave it at that.
My
With
man,
that with
yeah,
that
yeah,
yeah, with that being said, we'll talk. And so here we'll talk about the frozen middle. All right, I'll throw myself under the bus here. So I'm part of that middle right now. I'm 04, fingers in the reserves. Hopefully soon to make 05, but I am
yeah, yeah.
part of it. They talk about like they say you stop listening to new music when you turn 35. I've already crossed that threshold, and it's like I hear about AI, and I'm just like, nope, nope, don't want to do it. But the thing is, I do think that there is, like you said, at the highest level, there is that push to innovate, right? Because you want to change your force, make it better, and then there's people who actually have to implement those changes. That's kind of you talk about the frozen middle, but the new generation that's coming in, like the young people, early 20s, first enlistment types, they want to make those changes because their mind is young, it's open to change and all that. It's not set in its ways. And so what I want to know, and I think that this is a very good segue to talking about education, how you can kind of break through that plateau and as a mid-level person, as a chief, like E704 type person, to educate yourself for the next century to come and become that dynamic change leader that you should be.
Yeah, so I think two things, right? One, man, there's just a ton of resources, and you have to be careful, right? If you scroll through Instagram, there's, I mean, there's just a ton of resources that are available. Some, unofficially and officially on, AI, machine learning, and some of the new things. But I think maybe the best way is to ask some of these young people, right? To just, hey, I know you got a great idea. I'd love for you to because this is a challenge. This is how you can challenge them sometimes is, hey, you say you want to innovate in this way. Why don't you put together a presentation? You can present it to me first, and then if I like it or if it makes sense, then we can present it to the CEO on how we can use AI or innovation to better operations here in the thing. And oh, by the way, I'd love to learn more about, how this stuff works. It goes back to that, being open to learning from our young folks. And I think, when it this kind of before AI and stuff, right when we were in the age of young people like to text and use social media and we old guys like hands-on and all this other stuff. The way I always did it was, okay, I'll see you. I'll see your texting. No problem. I can text with you. I can communicate in the way that you like to communicate. But also, I'm going to force you to come to this meeting, right? You give a little bit, I give a little bit. I know you want to sit in a meeting and hear me ramble, or I know you want to come to a cookout because this is kind of how what we used to do back in the day. Like we would meet on the weekends and have a cookout and enjoy time. I know you want to do that, but I'll meet you and where you are, and you meet me where I am, and then I collaborate with those young people, earn a little bit of trust and respect, and to me, that's the best strategy. The hey, I'm in charge and you do what I say. It worked a long time ago. Just to be honest, Alec, it doesn't work anymore, man. Because people have choices and they don't really have to serve, um, and it just creates there's already this barrier, right? You know this from for officer and enlisted and rank wise, it just creates more of a barrier when the default is I'll rank you or I'm in charge. You must do what I say.
Yeah, and that even really comes back to like the mentorship aspect of things. And one of the best piece of advice I ever got from one of my chiefs was he said, "Get your we were on a submarine, so it was all male. So it was he said, get your guys to come up with a plan, and that means that these are smart. They know what they're doing, and you don't tell them the plan. Work together, have them come up with that plan, so they own the plan." And that gives that instant buy-in. And I'd never I was like, wow, that's so smart, and I did, and it was really just a great tool I used. And then I think thinking back to what you said about asking people for solutions, that also facilitates that mentorship relationship because people will now be more open to coming to you and they know that you value their opinion. So that's really, really a great piece of advice, and I appreciate you
Mhm.
sharing that. And I know we're coming up on time right now. I want to be respectful. I know how busy you are. Just wanted to touch real quickly on your transition because a lot of people use education to transition. Not none of our listeners, I don't think, are going to be having transition out of taking off the uniform at the level that you took it off. But taking off the uniform is a challenge for anybody. Whether you did 4 years, or in your case, did 31. So I want to hear a little bit about that process of leaving your position, taking off the uniform, and how you leverage the education you got while you're in the service to find your next career move.
Yeah, so transitioning as an SEL of any service, I'll be honest, well, I can only speak for myself, man, it's pretty easy, right? Because you kind of, whether you've earned it or deserve it or not, you have this instant credibility. So I walked right out into a CEO job of, we call it Air Force Aid Society, your Navy Marine Corps Relief Society equivalent. And But I think for most people who are transitioning, taking full advantage of your educational benefits can be very helpful, right? I think if you look at uh, not all jobs, but there are many jobs in the corporate, in the government sector, even in nonprofit, where as you're scrolling down, most of them have, at a minimum, bachelor's degree required. Now, it doesn't mean that that's the end all be all, but it is a good start. Even the process of going to school where you get to improve your communication skills, you get to improve your analytical skills and all your ability to research, your ability to work together in teams. I know a lot of schools do a lot of teaming these days. I think those are all valuable things that will help you in your transition when it comes to employment opportunities and figuring out um, that next portion of your life. Because most of us, the average person doesn't even get to 20, right? There's a relatively small percentage of people who get to 20, but let's just talk about the people who do get to 20. That means you're less than 40. You might just be pushing 40. So you got another lifetime and a half to still live in. And so I think one piece of advice that I give people today is, man, figure out as early as possible what it is that you want to do before you transition. Don't wait until you click the button for separation or retirement and then decide, I think I want to do this, right? There's nothing wrong with it, but a better strategy is 2, 3, 5 years out, deciding, I'm a submariner. Is that how you say it? I'm a submariner now, but when I get out, I want to be an entrepreneur, or I want to go into banking, or I want to do this. And so that means I need to start getting my education in finance, or I need to start attending conferences. I need to get this certification, that certification, so that you can have some level of comfort when you're transitioning. Most of the people that I know that are struggling with transition is because, and everybody says this, "Oh, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up," right? Which means I haven't decided what I want to do when I get out of the service. So I'm not coming at them from a judgmental position, but I am saying that you'll have a better chance of being successful, reducing stress and anxiety if you decide now, a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, that this is what I want to do. So let me start getting my ducks in a row so that I can make my transition more. I can start applying for jobs. I can start going to industry events. I can start connecting with people on LinkedIn in the industry that I want to be in, and getting helpful tips. I can start volunteering in these places and industries. And of course, I can start working on my education in these places that I think and know might be helpful.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And that's, what we as an organization are here for, because we talk about mentorship. Like when you sign up for us and you start going through that college application process, we give you a mentor, right? And having
Mhm.
that person that's, kind of come a couple years or done that walk down the road that you're going to walk down a couple years before you did is really helpful. In my case, I had that. It was instrumental to my success, and so really appreciate you sharing that. And I just want to turn it over to you. See if you have any last minute words of wisdom for our listeners.
Yeah, so again, man, thanks, Alec. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be a part of Service to School. And the other piece of advice I think I would give to transitioning individuals is two things. Be dreamers, right? Who would have ever thought that one, a prior enlisted person could get into the Columbias, the Dartmouths, the Harvards, the schools that S2S actually helps, and two, who would have ever known that there's an actual organization, a nonprofit that's dedicated and has mentors that's helping people, create and take advantage of these opportunities. And then the last piece of advice I would give is, in order to make your transition a lot smoother, figure out who you are beyond your uniform, right? So particularly the more senior you are, right? So when I was in uniform, yeah, they called me Enlisted Jesus because of, people I helped, but generally you get treated kind of like a king, especially as the senior enlisted guy or girl from any service, right? There's, you don't really have to do anything. You people are always doing stuff for you. You always have opportunities. But I had to figure out who I was beyond the uniform so that when I took it off, one, I didn't have that expectation. I didn't have a letdown. I didn't like miss all of this protocol and all this other stuff. So figure out who you are and what your values are and what you believe in so that when you transition and you leave the uniform behind, you can continue to have a successful life with or without, all the hoopla of being a military member. You'll still get the thank you for your service in the airport, and you'll still get your 10% off at Denny's and all that great stuff. But figure out who you are and what you are and what you stand for outside the uniform. I guarantee you'll have a more successful transition, and got to put in the plug for take full advantage of GI Bill, all the other educational opportunities that are available to you. And if you haven't taken advantage of the opportunities that S2S has, then, same thing, man. Resources are there. You just got to take advantage of.
Awesome, Kaleth. Thank you so much for all you've done and all you continue to do. So we really appreciate you having you on the podcast.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.